psychologist at the Child Mind Institute. We are a national nonprofit that supports children and families with gold standard medical care, mental health care, advice and resources. At this point, I'm not going to falsely advertise that we offer medical care as well, but certainly we do provide gold standard mental health care in addition to advice and resources for families, all online and accessible to everyone. You can learn more about the resources that we have available for families during the coronavirus crisis, including telehealth evaluations and treatment, by visiting us at childmind.org/coronavirus. Today, I'd like to spend some time talking about how you can help support your kids with ADHD and other learning disorders in their remote learning at home. So I'm going to be answering some of your questions about that, as well as anything else that you're wondering about. Please feel free to post your questions in the feed, and we'll also post some links to some helpful resources on childmind.org and any details about the next Facebook Live as well. Remember that we're here every day at 10 a.m. and at 4:30, and we look through your questions daily. The first thing that I really want to make sure that I emphasize before I get to your questions is that for all parents out there who are presumably right now trying to balance the demands of working from home with providing childcare on a full-time basis and now throwing into the mix homeschooling their children, please, please, please really try to throw perfection out the window. This is an incredibly stressful and challenging situation for everybody, and it's unprecedented at that. We really can only strive to do the best that we can do, and this is really not a time for us to be looking to be perfect. The most important thing right now for all of us is to try to maintain our physical and mental health. With that being said, the reality, though, for most families right now is that their homes have become their children's classrooms, for the time being at least. Remote learning, remote work for adults, but remote learning for kids as well is really challenging for any student. But learning differences, including ADHD or specific learning disabilities, are only going to add another layer of challenge for these kiddos and for their parents. We know that kids with learning disabilities really do require very explicit instruction from the teacher, often with some level of individualization, opportunities to ask questions of their teacher and to clarify what they're learning from their teachers, and opportunities to learn from peers and in groups. But now we have parents at home who are serving as teachers, therapists, coaches, and so much more without any training. Regardless of how bright you are, regardless of what a rock star you are at your own individual job, and regardless of how well you know your kids and how well you parent your kids, being expected to teach them right now is really a big ask of you. So really, please try to cut yourself some slack. I will start out the Facebook Live by offering some tips to help parents help their kids tackle the challenges of homeschool right now, but even with their exceptional learning styles. So before I get to your questions, I'm going to go through just some very broad recommendations that I would make for any parent, including parents who have kids who have ADHD or learning disorders. The first thing is, please do not be afraid to communicate with your child's team at school. It's really important for all parents to be aware of how their kids should be spending their time during the day, but this is especially true for parents whose kids have learning support in school. Parents should know what kind of support their kids are going to need in order to manage the academic demands of the curriculum, what support your child gets at school, and how can you help to maintain consistency at home. A lot of schools, I understand, are sending home packets of downloadable information for kids to fill out on their own if they're not also doing video chats or video learning. Are these packets that your student is expected to complete on his or her own? Are there modifications or accommodations that should be made to the packet? How much of a role should you as a parent be playing in helping to keep your child on task during this, etc.? No matter how many IEP meetings you've attended, how many parent-teacher conferences you've attended, no matter how well you know your child's learning profile, it is really important for you to be in touch with your kids' teachers about how you can be supporting your child at home and managing what they're sending home. The second broad tip that I want to give to parents is really do whatever you can to set your child up for success. That means making sure that your kids are sleeping well and eating well. If they're prescribed medication, making sure that they're continuing to take their medication as prescribed, making sure that they're tackling academic assignments when they're likely to be the most engaged. And actually for teenagers, that might mean a little bit later in the morning. We know that teenagers, adolescents actually naturally wake up later and go to bed later because of a developmental shift in the timing of melatonin secretion. So if this might actually be an okay time for them to engage in learning when their brains are most primed to be learning, whereas the typical school day during a more typical time unfortunately doesn't really cater to kids' biological clocks. But please do talk to your child's school and figure out what tools your kid is going to need in order to engage in the coursework. Make sure that they and your student understand how to use any software that they might be using. Try to find a place to designate as your child's workspace. Depending on your living situation, it may be hard to really carve out their own room, but do try to find a place that's quiet, distraction-free, and depending on how much oversight your student needs, that's also within your view, so you can provide monitoring as needed. The third tip is really please try to structure your child's day. To the extent possible, try to maintain a consistent schedule every weekday. Have your child wake up at the same time that he or she typically does, go to bed at the same time that he or she typically does. Upon waking, make sure that your child is having a good breakfast, getting dressed, and then really getting started with the schoolwork. All kids benefit from structure when things are uncertain, but we know that kids with ADHD and other developmental challenges really do need that kind of structure even more. With older kids, you might want to involve your child, your student, in setting that schedule. We know that if kids feel that they have some choice in when and how they're doing things, then you might get a little bit more buy-in. And for younger kids, creating a visual schedule that's posted somewhere and can really alert them to what's going to happen and when can be a really good way of keeping them on task. Make sure that you're building in frequent breaks. Those breaks should incorporate opportunities for movement, time to spend outdoors, and also try alternate less appealing academic tasks with something that's perhaps a little bit more rewarding for them. My fourth broader tip is to try to schedule academic activities in short chunks. We know that kids can really only focus and work effectively for 45 minutes at a time, and less than that for younger kids, a little more than that for older kids, and with some variability depending on your student's own individual learning style. But expecting your student to sit down and work for 2 or 3 hours at a stretch is really asking them to do something that we shouldn't have the expectation that they can do. So set a timer, have your child engage in some work for a short period of time that seems realistic for them. Set clear expectations for how long they should work, check in with them to see how they're able to manage that amount of time. That also gives you, depending on the age of your child and depending on their need for oversight and monitoring, it gives you an opportunity to step away and get some work done as well. I personally am trying to balance childcare with working from home. So having an opportunity to leave your child doing something structured and academic for a short period of time to give you an opportunity to then get through some of your work can actually be helpful for both of you. And the last broad tip is really to please try to keep your interactions as positive as possible. It might be hard for your children and for you to all of a sudden accept that mom or dad is my teacher. And really the most important thing for you as parents to do right now is to provide your children with feelings of love and security. So if you notice that your children are becoming frustrated by an assignment, perhaps suggest that they take a break and return to it when they've regrouped for a little while. Use incentives to get them started again. Use your positive attention, we know, is incredibly powerful as a reward for kids. So using special playtime perhaps after you finish this assignment that I know is really challenging for you as a nice reward for your child's efforts. And please, please, please know that it is okay for you to not be your child's teacher. You aren't your child's teacher. You certainly can check in with your child's learning support team at school and see if they can help you to problem solve how to modify an assignment if needed, or to provide support that your child might have otherwise gotten if he were in school at this time. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, your child is unlikely to learn as effectively at home as he or she would in the classroom, in the same way that we're unlikely to be as effective doing our work at home as we would be if we were under normal circumstances as well. So please give yourselves a break, give your children a break, focus on the things that really matter, which include the safety and health, including mental health of you, your family, and your community, and really try to preserve the relationship between you and your kiddos. So those are my big overview, my big broad points that I think can apply to all parents. but more specifically for kids with ADHD as well and learning disorders. So I'm seeing some questions start to pop in. So I'm going to pop over and see what those are and see if I can address some of them for you. Okay, so we have, this is a question, I'm going to read one question. This is something that I've actually already heard from several parents with whom I work. Someone said, we have 2 boys with ADHD and we're trying to homeschool in a small, messy apartment with 2 working parents. It's not going well. Any tips for how to structure our days so that we all get something done? So this is really challenging. It sounds like there are 3 to 4 people in the household who are trying to get through work, 2 of whom have some difficulty with attention and organizational skills, and they're trying to get through assignments and work in a not ideal small living space. So first of all, I would start by really thinking about where everyone is doing their work and really trying to set each person up to have maximum opportunity to complete their work in a focused way. So whether that means, parents have to sort of think about what works best for their individual family. Some kids might do really well having private space to do their work. So whether that means one child sits in a bedroom, one child sits in the kitchen, one child sits in another space that if you can find, or a parent's room. Other families might find that they really need to have eyes on their kids in order to make sure that their kids are getting their work done. So really, I think you have to make the decision that works best for you and your family, and then really trying to structure the day so that it's as close to a typical school and work day as possible. Again, I spoke earlier about how important it is to have a standard wake-up time. When you wake up in the morning, get dressed, have a good breakfast, and then going through what does the schedule look like. So perhaps at the start of every day, sitting down with each one of your students and seeing what does the learning look like for the day. Schools are really differing in terms of how they're rolling out remote learning. Some schools are really providing a very structured schedule with online classes and then time to work independently. Other schools are providing packets for kids to complete independently. So it really depends on what your school is doing. But if the onus is on you to structure work time, then I would look at how we can look at the work that was provided by the teachers, chunk it down so that you can break these larger packets, which can be very overwhelming for kids to look at all at once, into smaller and more manageable chunks, and really schedule out at the beginning of the day when you're going to do these assignments, for how long, what breaks are going to be incorporated in and when. Make sure that you take a nice break for lunch, perhaps use that as time to regroup together and have lunch and talk about what's been going on, check in on how the work has been going for the day, perhaps then have some nice outside time if you're in a place where you're allowed to go outside. Otherwise, find some downtime as though it were recess, to mimic the school day as well, before then reviewing the schedule for the afternoon. There are some wideopenschool.org, which is a website that's now been curated by Common Sense Media, has a really nice examples of schedules for children of all different ages that include some activities. If schools aren't sending home prescribed activities, academic activities, and enrichment activities, you can find some. There are a host of websites that we can also offer up that have some really nice academic and enrichment activities for kids. But wideopenschool.org actually has a really nice schedule that lays out, these are some morning activities. Perhaps sit down in the morning and have a morning meeting and talk about what day of the week it is. So many people I know, myself included, don't know what day of the week it is because this is just kind of a crazy topsy-turvy time. So I think helping to orient your kids from the get-go with that kind of a discussion in the morning, and there's again some examples about how to do that on wideopenschool.org, and then it has a really nice schedule for, here are some math activities that you can do for a prescribed period of time, here are some educational screen time activities that if parents do need to have some time to step away and leave their kids in a safe and supervised, somewhat enriching activity, these have been curated by Common Sense Media. Now let's take a screen-free break before getting back into some more academic and enrichment activities, either provided by the school or that you curate on your own. But there are some really nice website examples of schedules. WideOpenSchool.org, Understood.org also has some really nice template schedules that you can look into. But I think that really you're going to hear people talk a lot about schedules. They're really, really helpful in just anchoring us. Knowing when things are uncertain, knowing what's going to come, when, for how long, and before what is a really nice way to just feel structured and anchored. And I think that'll go a really long way for keeping both the kids with ADHD centered, and also for making parents feel as though they can manage the demands of homeschooling two boys with ADHD while also trying to get their work done. So let's see if there are other questions that I can hop to. This is an interesting one. So my 5-year-old has stage fright about getting on Zoom. He says people will laugh at him. He says the activities are too fast and he is refusing. So this is really interesting. And I would wonder whether this is a new behavior, whether there's a history of a student having being concerned about speaking in front of his peers in class, or whether this is a new thing. It's not uncommon for anxieties to pop up right now because and anxiety about what's going on in the world might manifest in other ways. So this might be an underlying just feeling of anxiety and insecurity that's surfacing now because of feelings of anxiety and insecurity because of the uncertainty and the complete disruption in our normal routine that a 5-year-old is experiencing right now. But I think that I would really try to incorporate the teacher into a discussion about this and learn more about whether this is something that's presented in the past, and see if the teacher can partner with you on how to make the child feel safer sharing or being involved in a video chat through Zoom. And otherwise, trying to check in with your child about whether or not he or she is having concerns about what's going on with coronavirus. A lot of kids may not know exactly none of us know exactly what's going on and how this is going to end, but kids really do feel safer when they're not left in the dark. So talking to kids about what's going on in a developmentally appropriate way, giving them an opportunity to ask questions and answering their questions in a direct way without necessarily providing more information than they're seeking, but by really trying to address their questions in a way that can make them feel like they have information and knowledge, which is powerful and can make them feel a little bit more in control, might help to alleviate just some underlying anxiety that might also be at play there. So let's see. Here is another interesting question, and something that a lot of people are talking a lot about. My son has ODD, which for those of you who are not familiar with the term, that's oppositional defiant disorder. It's been rough. He still gets help, but his tantrums have been getting worse. What am I not doing to fulfill his needs? The first thing that I would say is to please check that last question. What am I not doing to fulfill my needs, to fulfill his needs? This has nothing to do with what you are or are not providing your son. This is a really difficult situation, and kids who don't historically have behavioral issues are presenting with behavioral issues because kids have very limited means of expressing their feelings and frustration and anxiety. And their entire routine has been completely overthrown. A lot of kids have lost their peer group. They've lost access to activities that get them outside and that get them involved in things that make them feel good and things that make them feel powerful and just experience enjoyment, which is a great stress reliever. And kids have lost all of that. This really is contributing to a big loss for children in addition to adults. There's also a lot of tension that kids very easily pick up on. So it's not surprising that a complete disruption in a routine like this is going to bring out behavioral issues. We know that kids with ODD often can be very rigid in their thinking, so they have a very difficult time thinking flexibly and adapting to changes in situations. This is probably one of the biggest change experiences that requires adaptation. And so, of course, it's going to trigger frustration, and of course, it's going to trigger outbursts and tantrums. And this has, again, nothing to do with what you are or not doing to fulfill his needs. I think that I would, again, go back to the whole thing, which is structure and consistency, to the extent that you can really try to keep your son's day as close to a typical school day as possible. Meaning waking up at the same time, going to bed at the same time, having meals the way you typically have meals, building in opportunities for social experiences. So whether that means having Zoom play dates or driving past a friend's house to wave, those social contacts are really, really helpful. Sometimes social contacts are the only things that help that really get kids who struggle with learning through the day at school. But really try to the extent that you can, try to mimic every day, mimic a typical school day for your child, and layer on the positive, specific labeled praise for these kids, because this is really hard. This is hard for you, and it's harder for children because we have no control over this, and kids have even less, and they have less cognitive capacity to really process what's going on. And so I really would just like to emphasize the importance of really layering on positive attention, labeled praise for what your son is doing, as opposed to really trying to focus on what he is not doing. Okay. My son this is a little bit related. My son gets angry very quickly. These really are trying times, and we've tried so many ways to get him involved, but he refuses. What can we do? So I don't know if that means referring to getting involved in family activities, but I'm going to go back to, this is really hard, and I think it's okay to validate your children's feelings that, yeah, this is really tough, this is really frustrating, it really stinks that we can't see our friends, it really stinks that you can't play, that your baseball season was canceled, it really stinks that we can't go to the park. Really, validation goes a very long way for kids with regard to emotion regulation, and trying to help problem solve. What can we do to make the situation a little bit better when we get kids to feel like they have a role in, or they have a say or a voice in what we're doing. You certainly get a little bit more buy-in. If you're trying, I don't know what you mean by trying to get them involved. I don't know if, again, that means involved in cooking or involved in chores or involved in schoolwork, but definitely trying to alternate an appealing activity with a less appealing activity is a really great way to get behavioral compliance with something that a child is expressing some reluctance to do. So if you're trying to get your child to do a math worksheet, when math is hard, kids don't want to do math worksheets. So first of all, perhaps chunking it down. So think about maybe having him do half of the math worksheet now and saving half of the math worksheet for later. Sometimes even a limit, like blocking the second half of the worksheet from your child's view so that he doesn't get overwhelmed by the amount of math material that he has to conquer eventually. So that might even mean physically modifying the math worksheet. I'm using math as an example because I don't, again, know exactly what this question is referring to, but you can modify this for whatever situation you're talking that applies to you. Really trying to reduce the load that your child is facing in the moment. So really, again, chunking it down, trying to minimize, trying to shorten the amount of time that the activity is going to take for your student, and then providing a reward by allowing him or her to engage in something that's a little bit more enticing. So when you finish these 10 math word problems, let's go outside and run in the sprinklers for a little bit, and then you'll come back and we'll finish this math worksheet, and then we'll get to play with our Roblox. But really trying to alternate a more appealing with a less appealing activity, and that can apply to chores as well. So after you help me with the dishes, we'll go upstairs and read with 3 of your favorite books together. I also want to emphasize that right now, with so many family members living under the same roof, kids are most likely vying for attention, and positive attention from parents is gold. So I also think it's really important for parents to really try to make time to spend time individually with each one of their kids, and to use that as a really powerful reward. It looks like we have just 2 more minutes, so I'm going to look for last questions and or sum up what we've already talked about. There's one more question. Someone is typing, but there's also a question that we got earlier, which has to do with a child with auditory processing disorder, and much of his school's online learning involves listening and remembering. I feel at a loss for how to support him. Any advice? So online learning, this homeschooling experiment, for lack of a better word, has its challenges, certainly for kids with learning disabilities, but it actually also really has its benefits, because there are so many different ways that you can present the information that your child is expected to learn. So if your child, you know that your child really struggles to process auditory information, partner with your teacher and see if you can find online through Khan Academy or YouTube, or just by doing Google searches yourself with, again, the support of your teachers, ways to present the information that your student is trying to tackle in a more visual way, or a way that really appeals to or plays into his or her learning strengths. A classroom setting tends to be a little bit one size fits all. And now, you know, in the same, you're not a teacher. We're not expecting you to mimic what your teacher does in the classroom, but this is actually an opportunity for you to be a little bit creative and present information in a way that your child is going to find it a little bit more appealing, and is going to be able to master it using the things that he or she is really good at. But again, I would encourage you to communicate with your child's teacher, and really to partner with your child's teacher in order to make sure that you're teaching the lesson in a way that will be consistent with what he or she is asking. So I think that we are just, I don't know if we're just about out of time. I'm going to just very quickly review what we discussed. This is really difficult. It's really difficult for parents. It's really difficult for students. It's really difficult for teachers also, who may or may not be parents themselves. So cut yourselves some slack, cut your kids some slack. Understand that for kids with ADHD, for kids with learning disabilities, for kids with social cognitive or social communication weaknesses, for kids with anxiety, this is much harder for them. So really try to validate what they're going through, try to validate how this is difficult, try to layer on positive attention and very specific labeled praise. And also, to the extent that you can, enjoy this time together. I know that I'm really trying to use this, the silver lining of this as a way of really spending a ton of time with my toddler that I would not have otherwise had time to do. So I think it's easy to kind of go down the rabbit hole of thinking about how stressful and chaotic and panic-inducing the situation is. And to the extent that you can really try to focus on the positive, which is that hopefully, knock on wood, your families are healthy and safe, and you have quality time together, and try to really make the most of it. So again, we have, please don't forget to check back in with us tomorrow morning. We have another Facebook Live at 10 a.m. and then again at 4:30 in the afternoon. And for more resources, please go to childmind.org/coronavirus to see what else we have to offer families. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and stay safe and well.